There was blood on the porch the morning I found him. Not a lot, just a smear, dark and already dried, running from the tree line to the bottom step, like something had dragged itself to me on purpose. I remember standing there in my work boots, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at that line in the gray November light. The woods behind my property were still, too still. No wind, no birds, just that silence that sits in your chest like a stone. I set the mug down on the railing and followed the trail with my eyes. It ended at the woodpile, stacked against the east wall of the house, where I kept the splits for the stove. Something was breathing in there. I could see it before I could hear it. The woodpile shuddered. A small, wet, rhythmic movement, barely visible between the logs. I should have gone back inside. Any man with good sense would have gone back inside. But I am not a man who has ever been accused of good sense, and the thing in the woodpile was so small, and the blood trail was so desperate, that I moved toward it before I had made any decision at all. I pulled the top 2 logs off and set them aside. What I found underneath was not a dog. I knew that immediately. I had kept dogs my whole life. I knew the shape of a dog the way I knew the shape of my own hands. This was not that. It was covered in dark, coarse fur, matted with mud and blood from a wound on its left flank. The proportions were wrong. The hind legs were too long. The face was flattened in a way that sat between animal and something I did not want to name. Its eyes were closed. It was the size of a large rabbit, maybe a little bigger. Its hands, and I say hands because that is what they were curled up under its chin the way a child sleeps. I stood there for a long time. The cold was settling into my fingers. The woods stayed silent. Nobody came to claim it. Nobody came at all. I went inside, got an old feed sack, and brought it in out of the cold. That was November 9th, 2007. I know the date because it was 4 days after my 54th birthday, and I had spent those 4 days alone, the way I had spent most days since Margaret left in the spring of that year. The house still had her curtains up. I had not been able to take them down. I was not doing well. I say that plainly because it matters to what comes after. A man in better shape might have made different choices. A man with less empty space in his life might have called someone. I did not call anyone. I cleaned the wound with warm water and an old cloth, bandaged the flank with strips of flannel I cut from a shirt I no longer wore, and put the creature in a wooden crate near the stove where it would be warm. Then I sat in the kitchen and watched it breathe until the sun went down. It took 3 days before it opened its eyes. They were amber, almost gold, catching the stove light the way a dog's eyes do, but steadier, calmer. It looked at me the way I imagine I looked at it, with a kind of suspended judgment, trying to decide what the other one was. It did not growl, it did not flinch when I reached in to check the bandage. It pressed its nose against the back of my hand, held it there for a moment, then pulled away. That was the whole of our first real meeting. A hand, a nose, a moment of something I could not explain. I told myself it was just an injured animal, something rare, maybe a known species I had never encountered. I was not ready to say the other word, not yet, not for a long time. By the end of that first week I had named him. The name came from nowhere particular, the way names do. I called him Burl. It was the name of a knot in wood, dense and irregular, something that did not fit the grain around it but was stronger for that very reason. It suited him. He was eating by then, raw meat at first, venison scraps from the freezer. He ate without urgency, methodically, holding the pieces in those small hands and working at them with teeth that were sharper than they should have been on something so young. He watched me while he ate. always watching. I began to understand in those first quiet weeks that whatever else he was paying close attention to everything I did, to where I moved in the room, to the sounds the house made, to me. The wound healed faster than it should have. By the third week, the flannel wrapping was unnecessary. The skin beneath it had closed completely, leaving a ridge of scar tissue in the fur that I could feel with my thumb but not see. I had a routine by then. I woke early before the winter light came up. I stoked the stove. I fed Burl. I went out and checked the fences along the north pasture, which were always needing something. I came back in, made coffee, sat at the table. Burl would climb up onto the bench across from me, not beside me but across, and sit with his hands flat on the table. Just sitting there, watching. I started talking to him. I am not proud of how quickly that happened, but the house was very quiet, and he listened, which is more than most people did. The thing I gave him, the one thing that was only ever ours, was a stick of pine pitch. I know how that sounds. It was not sentimental at the time. The first morning I let him move freely in the kitchen, he followed me to the wood box and watched me pick up a pine split for the stove. There was a knob of hardened pitch on the end of one log, amber and smooth. He reached out and touched it before I could pull it away. He held it, turned it in his hands, pressed it to his nose and breathed in. I did not take it from him. I let him keep it. He carried it back to his sleeping spot near the stove and set it down carefully, the way a child sets down something precious. That was December 2007. After that, I always kept a piece of pine pitch somewhere within his reach. When I was cutting wood, I would set aside any piece that had a good knob of it. I would bring it inside and leave it on the table. He always found it. He always held it the same way, 2 hands, slow rotation, nose pressed to the surface. It was the only thing he did that looked like prayer. Winter that year was brutal in a way that felt personal. The temperature dropped below 0 in January and stayed there for 11 days without a break. The pipes in the mudroom froze. The truck would not start for a week. I was snowed in with Burl and a dwindling supply of firewood, and I worked through it the only way I knew, one task at a time, one day at a time. He was growing. Slowly, but growing. By February, he was the size of a beagle. His hind legs were developing a kind of thickness, a muscular density I had not expected. He was beginning to pull himself upright against the furniture. Not standing, not yet, but testing, exploring the idea of height. I watched him do it one morning in the blue pre-dawn light, his small hands gripping the leg of the kitchen table, his body straightening in stages. He got almost fully upright, held it for 3 seconds, then dropped back down. He looked at me. I said nothing. He tried again. The spring thaw came in late March that year, and with it, the first real fear I felt about him. Not for myself, for him. The neighbor to the east, Earl Brandt, had a habit of walking the fence line in spring, checking for winter damage. I had 40 yards of shared fence. Earl was not a curious man in the way that causes problems, but he was thorough, and thorough men see things. I started keeping Burl in the back room when I heard Earl's truck on the access road. Burl did not like the back room. He tolerated it. He had learned already, in that first winter, to read the tension in my body. When I moved a certain way, with that particular economy that means something is coming, he went still and quiet. He understood more than I was comfortable acknowledging. I told myself it was animal instinct, pattern recognition. I kept telling myself that for a long time. By his first summer, he was moving through the house with a kind of deliberate ease that stopped being animal and started being something else. He opened the screen door himself one morning in July. Not by accident, not by pawing at it. He gripped the handle in his right hand and pushed the release mechanism with his thumb and walked out onto the porch. I was sitting in the chair with my coffee, and I watched him do it, and I did not say anything. He walked to the edge of the porch and stood there in the morning heat, looking at the tree line. The same tree line he had crawled out of 8 months before. He stood there for a long time. Then he came back inside. I noticed then that he had grown to about 3 feet tall. His posture, even when he walked on all fours, had changed. There was intention in it. Direction? He was not exploring anymore. He knew where he was going. I started noticing other things that summer. He had stopped eating from the bowl I put on the floor. One morning in August, I found him sitting at the table, waiting. The bowl was still on the floor. He was sitting on the bench, hands flat on the table, looking at me. I moved the bowl to the table without a word. He ate. That was how it went with Burl. He never demanded, he never performed. He simply waited until I caught up with what he already understood, and then we moved forward together. I never felt manipulated by it. I felt instructed. I say that carefully. I was a grown man. I had worked 30 years with my hands. I did not follow easily, but he had a patience in him that wore down my resistance the way water wears down stone. Slow, consistent, without anger. The summer of 2008 was when he first showed me the woods. I do not mean he led me into them. I mean he began going out at the edge of dusk to the first line of trees and sitting there for an hour at a time. And one evening I followed him out and sat down in the grass beside him. He did not look at me. We both looked at the trees. The light was going orange and low through the maples. The mosquitoes were out. The grass was dry and rustling. We sat there until the dark came up, and the first bats came out over the field, and then we went back inside together. After that, it was a nightly thing. Most evenings, most summers, we went out to the tree line at dusk and sat. I started bringing the coffee. He started leaning against my leg, not heavily, just a presence, just enough to know the other one was there. 2009. He was nearly 4 feet tall by autumn, and his voice was coming in, not words, not yet, but sounds that were not animal sounds. He had a low hum he made when he was content, sitting by the stove, holding a piece of pine pitch. He had a sharp, brief vocalization that I had come to understand meant attention. Pay attention to this. And he had one sound I only heard twice that year, deep and hollow and reverberant, that I did not have a word for. I heard it the first time when a coyote came too close to the porch at night. I heard it the second time when Earl Brandt's truck came down the access road moving faster than usual. Both times the sound had the same effect on me. Every muscle in my body said to be very still. I am not a man who frightens easily. That sound frightened me. Not because it was violent, because it was so completely controlled. I remember January of 2010 the way I remember certain accidents, clearly in individual frames, with no blur at the edges. There was a cold snap the third week of the month, the worst since the year I found him. I had brought in enough wood for 3 days. On the second night, the stove went low around 2 in the morning, and I woke to the cold and found Burl already at the wood box, pulling logs out one by one and carrying them to the stove. He had learned to work the stove door. He had not told me he had learned. He was doing it because it needed doing, and I was asleep. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching him work. The orange stove light on his fur, his movements careful and quiet. He loaded 3 logs, closed the door, and then turned and saw me. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he went back to his sleeping spot and lay down. I went back to bed. I lay there in the warming room and stared at the ceiling, and understood that I had passed some kind of point from which I was not going to return. By spring of 2010, he was 4.5 feet tall, and the proportions of his face had shifted. The flatness had resolved into something more defined. His jaw was heavy. His brow was pronounced. He moved bipedally more often than not, especially inside the house. Watching him cross the kitchen was like watching two things at once: the animal I had found in the woodpile and something I could not categorize. I caught myself one evening watching him and thinking of the word person, and then stopping myself hard. I was not ready for that. I do not know if I ever became ready, but the thought kept coming back, quiet and persistent, the way guilt does. His hands were the hardest part to reconcile. By that second summer, they were fully functional in a way that went beyond any animal analog I had ever encountered. He could untie a knot. He could peel an apple, which I know because I watched him do it one morning with a small paring knife I had left on the counter. He held the knife correctly. He produced a single continuous peel in the way a patient, practiced person does. He set the knife down when he was done, placed the apple in front of my coffee cup, and walked to the window. I sat down and ate the apple. I did not speak. I did not know what to say. I ate it slowly and looked at the back of his head and thought about Margaret's curtains still hanging in the windows, and about how the year she left I had thought I would never feel anything settle back into place. Things had settled, not back into their original place. Somewhere new. Somewhere I had not chosen, but had come to nonetheless. 2011 was the year I almost lost him. Not to something external, to a choice I made. My brother Raymond came up from Lansing in September for the hunting season. Raymond and I had an arrangement that had worked for 20 years. He came, we hunted the South Woodlot for 3 days, he went home. I had always been glad to see him leave. Not because I disliked him, because he was loud and careless with his attention, and those 3 days always cost me something. That year, they nearly cost me everything. I had been keeping Burl in the basement during Raymond's visits. The basement was finished enough, warm enough, and Burl had accepted it without protest. He went down when I opened the door and he waited. He had always waited. But Raymond stayed a 4th day that year because of a storm that came through and closed the roads. And on the 4th morning, I went down with Burl's food and Raymond was behind me. I had not heard him on the stairs. Raymond stopped on the 3rd step. Burl was sitting at the workbench I had set up for him down there, holding a piece of pine pitch in both hands, doing the slow rotation I had watched him do 1,000 times. He was 5 feet tall by then. In the basement light he looked larger. Raymond made a sound, not a word, just a sound of pure, unprocessed shock. Burl turned and looked at him. He did not move. He did not make the hollow sound. He simply held Raymond's gaze with that suspended, assessing stillness that I had come to know as his version of caution. I stepped in front of Raymond. I said, "Go upstairs." Raymond said, "Dale, what?" I said, "Raymond, go upstairs right now." He went, and I stayed with Burl for a moment, and Burl looked at me and I looked at him, and there was something between us in that moment that was the closest thing to communication I can describe. An understanding that this was a problem, that I knew it, that he knew it, that we were going to have to manage it together. Raymond and I talked in the kitchen for 3 hours. I told him as much of the truth as I thought he could absorb. He thought I was out of my mind. He said it twice in different words. He said I needed to call someone, a wildlife agency, a university, someone. I told him I was not going to do that. He said it was dangerous. I told him I had not been harmed in 4 years. He said that did not mean anything. I told him, "Raymond, I know what I'm doing." He looked at me the way a man looks at someone he suspects is beyond reach and said, "Dale, that thing is not a dog." I said, "I know that." He left the next morning when the roads cleared. He did not come back for hunting season after that. He called every few months. He never asked about Burl directly. He just asked me how I was doing, in a tone that meant something specific, and I said I was fine, in a tone that meant he should stop asking. That winter, December of 2011, I gave Burl a knife. Not the paring knife. A proper folding knife, bone handle, 3-inch blade. I had a spare one in the toolbox, and I left it on the table one morning without ceremony and watched from the stove. He picked it up, turned it over, found the notch in the blade spine and opened it with his thumbnail on the first try. He looked at it open for a long moment. Then he folded it closed. He put it in the front pocket of the work vest I had started leaving for him, which he wore consistently from October through March because the house drafts bothered him. He never took the knife out in front of me again. I never asked about it. It was his. That was the whole of the transaction. But something shifted after that, the balance of what we were to each other. It had always been caretaker and charge. After the knife, it became something more lateral, something that had no name I knew. 2012 through 2014 were the middle years, the long, flat years, and they were in many ways the best years of my life. I do not say that with the ease it might seem. I say it with the full knowledge of what it means about everything that came before and after. Burl was 5, 6, 7 years old by that count, though I had no real way to know. He was over 5.5 feet tall. He moved through the house and the near property with complete authority. He helped with the firewood without being asked. He had preferences. He disliked the sound of the truck radio, and I stopped turning it on. He liked the dusk hours. He liked the pine pitch ritual. He liked sitting at the table across from me in the morning while I drank my coffee. He did not drink coffee. He had a bowl of water he refreshed himself, carrying it to the tap and back with steady, careful hands. I remember a morning in March of 2013. It was a Thursday. I know because I had been to town for supplies on Wednesday and the bags were still on the counter. The snow was heavy that morning, coming down thick and slow, the kind that muffles everything and makes the world feel smaller and safer than it is. Burl was at the table. I was at the stove making eggs. I had the radio off. The only sounds were the snow and the stove and the small sounds of him turning the pine pitch in his hands. I cracked the eggs into the pan, and the sizzle of them was loud and domestic, and I thought, for the first time in years, that I was happy. Not content, not managing. Happy. The specific, undeserved kind that comes without announcement. I did not say it out loud. I did not look at him. I just stood there at the stove in the snow-muffled morning and let the feeling exist. The summers were different from the winters in a way that mattered. Summer brought other people closer. Hikers sometimes used the trail at the north end of the property. Hunters scouted in August. The township road crew came through twice a year, and occasionally a man would stop to ask about the property lines. I had developed a system over the years, a way of moving through those interactions quickly, of answering without inviting, of being a neighbor without being known. Burl understood the system. On days when I thought there might be traffic, he stayed in the house. He watched from the kitchen window. He learned the difference between vehicles that passed and vehicles that slowed. He had a different stillness for each. I noticed he had begun cataloging things I had not taught him to catalog. He was building his own understanding of the world, and it was running parallel to mine, and sometimes it was ahead of mine, and I found that frightening and extraordinary in equal measure. 2013 I got sick. Not seriously at first. A chest infection in February that I did not treat quickly enough, the way men my age sometimes fail to treat things, through stubbornness or distraction, or a general feeling of not wanting to stop and deal with something that can be pushed through. By the third week I could not push through it. I was running a fever. My chest was tight in a way that worried me at night when I lay still and listened to it. I was 60 years old that year. I knew what the inside of a bad chest infection felt like. I had had one before, in my mid-40s, and that one had put me in the hospital for 4 days. I did not want to go to the hospital. I did not want to leave Burl alone. I did not want to explain the situation to anyone. So I stayed home and got worse. On the 4th night of the fever, I woke at 2 a.m. to find Burl sitting beside the bed. Not on the floor. He had pulled the chair from the corner of the room and placed it beside the bed, and he was sitting in it, upright, watching me. He had a cold cloth in his hands. I do not know where he found the cloth or how he got it cold. He pressed it to my forehead with a carefulness that I can only describe as knowing. Not animal instinct, knowing. He sat there for the rest of the night. I drifted in and out of sleep, and every time I came back he was there. By morning, the fever had broken. I was weak and my chest still rattled, but the worst of it was gone. I lay in the damp sheets and looked at him in the gray morning light and tried to find words, and could not. He took the cloth from my forehead. He folded it carefully. He set it on the nightstand. He went to the kitchen. I heard him working the stove. I smelled the coffee. I lay there in the bed and pressed my hand over my eyes and breathed. 2014 was when his voice started becoming language. I do not want to make it dramatic because the truth of it was not dramatic. It was gradual in the way that anything inevitable is gradual. You look back and see the slope clearly. Living it, you just think it is still the same flat ground. He had been making sounds with shape for years, sounds that had the rhythm of words without the content. That year, the content started arriving. The first word I identified was a sound for the pine pitch. It was not any word I knew. It was 2 syllables, low and resonant, and he used it consistently from around March of that year, always when he picked up a piece of pitch, always in the same register. I started using it too. Not immediately, but by summer I was saying it when I set a piece out for him, and he would look up and hold my gaze for a moment and then take it. By fall of 2014, he had 5 words I could consistently identify. The pitch word, a word for morning, for the specific quality of morning light. A word for the tree line, always set at dusk. A word I believed meant the house, or perhaps safety. I was never entirely sure of the distinction. And one word I did not understand at all. He used it rarely and only at night, looking out the window toward the east. It was a long word, more syllables than the others, and the sound of it was different in quality. Heavier, like something carried a long distance. I asked him about it once. I said, "What does that mean?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said the word again, slowly, as if giving me more time with it would help. It did not help. I nodded. He turned back to the window. I thought about that word for months without arriving at a meaning, and eventually I set it aside as something not meant for me to know. 2015 was the year of the father. I have been building to this since the beginning. I have given you 7 years of mornings and firewood and cold coffee and silence because I want you to understand what was in the room when it happened, what was at stake, what I was protecting, and what I was about to lose. Burl was by this point nearly 6 feet tall. He was lean and dense, and his movements had a precision that made the house feel small around him. He had more than a dozen words. He helped me with almost everything. He knew the property as well as I did. He had never left it. He had never gone beyond the tree line in all the years I had known him. He went to the edge and sat, every dusk, looking in, but he never crossed. I had never asked him not to. He had made that choice himself, and I had not examined it because I did not want to know the answer. The night of August 14th, 2015, I was on the porch after supper. The air was warm and smelled of cut grass, and the light was going down through the maples the way it did in high summer, thick and amber and slow. I had my coffee. Burl was not at the tree line. He was inside. I could hear him at the table, the soft sound of the pine pitch turning in his hands. The woods were quiet. They had been quiet for 3 days in a way that sat differently than usual quiet. Not peaceful. Held. Like something very large was being careful. I had noticed it but had not said anything because I did not have the words for what I had noticed, and I told myself I was inventing a problem. At 9:40 in the evening, the tree line moved. Not in the way the wind moves it. In the way something very large moving carefully moves it. A single maple at the center of the north edge swayed at the base. The top stayed still, then went still. Then the shadow at the base of that tree resolved into a shape that was not shadow. It was standing. It was taller than anything I had any business seeing standing at the edge of my field. 7 feet at minimum, possibly 8. The proportions were Burl's proportions, expanded. The same heavy brow, the same dark fur, the same quality of absolute stillness that I had first learned from a creature the size of a rabbit sleeping in my woodpile. I did not move. The thing at the tree line did not move. We held each other across 40 yards of open grass in the August dark. Then I heard the screen door. Burl stepped onto the porch beside me. He stood there for a moment. I felt him go absolutely rigid. Not with fear. I know what fear feels like in a body standing next to you. This was something older than fear. Recognition. He made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not the hollow warning sound, not the hum of contentment. Something in between, wavering, complicated, containing more than one thing at once. The figure at the tree line made the same sound back. Lower, larger, the same uncertain quality. Burl stepped off the porch. He walked to the middle of the field and stopped. He did not look back at me. He stood in the middle of the field and the figure at the tree line moved forward, and they met at the center with a stillness that was the loudest thing I have ever not heard. I stood on the porch with my cold coffee, and I watched my 7 years standing in the dark grass with its father. I do not know how long they stood there, an hour, maybe more. I went inside at some point and sat in the kitchen. I did not turn the lights on. I sat in the dark and listened to the house. After a while, I heard the screen door. Burl came in. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, visible against the slightly lighter dark of the window behind him. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, from something else. He came to the table and sat down. He picked up the pine pitch from where he had left it. He held it in the dark. I said nothing. He said nothing. The woods outside were still again. Whatever was out there had gone back. For that night. I knew even then it had not gone far. The next 3 mornings I watched him. He went to the tree line at dusk as he always had, but now he looked differently into the dark. Not contemplating. Listening. On the 3rd morning after the meeting, he came to me at the kitchen table while I was having coffee, and he stood across from me and said a word. I had not heard it before. He said it clearly and steadily, looking directly at me. It was 2 syllables. The 2nd syllable dropped, the way the end of a sentence drops when the meaning is complete. I said, I don't understand. Don't. He said it again, exactly the same. Then he put both hands flat on the table, the way he always sat, and looked at me. I looked back. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot understand. He held my gaze for another long moment. Then he sat down and picked up the pine pitch and pressed his nose to it and breathed. I wrapped both of my hands around my coffee cup and tried to understand what had just been asked of me. September of 2015. He was going to the tree line every night and not coming back until after midnight. I knew because I was not sleeping. I lay in the bed and listened for the screen door and counted the hours. He always came back. He was always at the table in the morning. But something was loosening. I could feel it the way you can feel a joint going before it goes. Not pain yet, just the wrong quality of movement, the wrong sound when it bears weight. I did not say anything to him about the nightly absences. I did not have the right. He was not a dog. He was not my child, though that word has lived in the bottom of my chest for years, and I am saying it now because I am past the point of managing what I say. He was not mine in any of the ways that allow a man to impose a limitation. I knew that. I had always known that. Knowing it did not help. October 3rd, 2015. I remember the date. I remember the exact quality of the morning light, gray and flat, the first real cold of autumn pressing against the windows. I came into the kitchen at 5:30 to find Burl already at the table. He was sitting upright, both hands flat on the wood, and in front of him, centered precisely, was the piece of pine pitch. Not in his hands. Set down. It was the piece I had given him 2 weeks before, a good-sized knob, smooth on one side from handling. He was not touching it. He was looking at me. I sat down across from him. He looked at the pine pitch. I looked at the pine pitch. Then he spoke. He said 3 words. I have spent 10 years turning those 3 words over in my mind, the way he turned the pine pitch, looking for the meaning I could not find in the moment. The first word was the 2-syllable word he had said to me before, the one I had not understood. The second word was the word for morning. The third word was a word I had never heard from him at all, short and hard and final, like a door closing. He stood up. He left the pine pitch on the table. He walked past me to the mudroom, and I heard him open the back door, which he never used, and I heard it close behind him. I did not move immediately. I sat at the table with the pine pitch between us, between where I sat and where he had sat, and I listened to the morning around the house. No screen door. He had gone out the back. I got up and went to the back window. He was crossing the south field toward the far tree line, moving at a steady walk, not hurrying, not looking back. He was carrying nothing, he was wearing nothing, just himself, moving through the gray October morning toward the edge of the world I had kept him inside of. I watched him until the trees took him. The field was empty. The morning was quiet. The pine pitch was still on the table. I went out looking that afternoon. I went to the tree line and followed it north for a mile and found nothing. I went out the next morning before light and sat in the field for 2 hours. I went out every day for the first week. I found signs sometimes, prints in the mud along the creek. A branch moved aside and not replaced. The smell of him, that particular smell of pine and earth and warm fur that I had lived with for 7 years, drifting from a stand of hemlocks on a cold morning. He was nearby. He was not coming back. I understood the distinction in the way that a man understands a loss that he chose not to prevent. I could have built a fence. I could have closed the property more completely in the years before the father came. I had not done those things because some part of me had known, from the morning I brought him in out of the woodpile, that I was holding something that was not meant to be held. The winter of 2015 was very long. I kept the stove going. I kept the wood box filled. I sat at the table in the mornings with my coffee, and the kitchen across from me was empty in a way that had its own specific weight. The bench where he sat was just a bench. I could not look at it for the first 2 months. In January, I started going to the tree line at dusk, the way we had done together, and sitting in the grass. It was 20 degrees, and I wore the heavy coat, and I sat there until the cold got through it, and then I went inside. I kept doing it. Not because I expected anything, because the habit of it was the last part of the shape of those years that I could still occupy. The pine pitch sat on the kitchen table. I did not move it. March of 2016, 6 months since he left. I was at the south fence line replacing a post that had heaved over the winter when I heard it. The hollow sound, the one that stopped every muscle in my body and held them still. It came from the woodlot, 40 yards east, and it was not Burl's voice. It was larger, deeper. I stood at the fence post with the post hole digger in my hands, and I did not turn. I waited. The sound came once more, and then it was quiet. I finished the fence post. I went back to the house. I sat at the table. The pine pitch was in front of me, and I picked it up for the first time since he left and held it in both hands and turned it slowly and pressed it to my nose and breathed. It smelled like nothing special to anyone else. Pine sap and cold. But inside that smell was 7 years. Inside it was the morning he opened the screen door and stood looking at the tree line. Inside it was the dusk hours in the grass. Inside it was the night he sat beside my bed with the cold cloth in his hands. Inside it was the breakfast table, and the knife I left without ceremony and the eggs I made in the snow-heavy morning when I was happy in the undeserved way. Inside it was 3 words I still do not fully understand, and a bench that is just a bench and a back door I cannot use without stopping. I held it for a long time. Then I set it back down in the center of the table, in the spot where he had placed it on the morning he left, and I looked at it, and I understood the thing I had not been able to understand. He had given it back to me, not as an ending, as a transfer. The thing that had always meant him to me, he had made mean both of us, and then he had left it so that when he was gone the thing would still be there, and so would I, inside it, in the same moment. He had not been saying goodbye. He had been saying that the morning would still exist, that it was still somewhere real, preserved in that small piece of amber-colored pine, still turning slowly, still carrying its particular warmth. I am 63 years old. I have lost more than I have kept. I have held on to things long after they were finished, and I have let go of things before they were ready. What I know now, the one true thing this cost me 7 years, and an empty bench and 3 words I cannot translate, is that some bonds do not end with the last day. They end with an object left in the exact center of a table, placed deliberately by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. And the grief of that is not in the leaving. The grief is in understanding, too late and too clearly, that you were loved by something that knew it had to go.